Jack. He's going to introduce Bob McClelland, I would think. Who are you going to introduce first, Jack? McClelland?
McClelland, I'll throw Atwood away at the end. This morning I'm going to be writing a letter to a social credit cabinet minister in person. And I'm going to use my own name and he's going to use his own name. But we're going to be quite serious on a couple of topics. One of them, of course, is one which depresses me greatly. As far as I'm concerned, the virtual collapse of the once proud plans of the government and the Compulsory Heroin Treatment Act, which are now absolutely lying about in pieces on the floor. And one is inclined to say to the minister, who is Bob McClelland, the Minister of Health, why not just get out of the field altogether? And if the feds won't cooperate, let's get back to the bad old days, when you left it to the police, you left it to the courts, you left it to the jails, and all the expenses to the federal government. That's one of the topics we'll be tackling with Bob McClelland this morning. Later on the program, because it is Friday, Margaret Atwood, fanatics of which there are many, will be pleased to meet her and have a little chat with her about her fantastic success, the living legend in her own time. But first, Bob McClelland. Bob McClelland, I suggested at the top of the program this morning that your program of compulsory treatment may well be an expensive splinters and that you may be wasting your time with an appeal, and that perhaps what you should do now, with every man's hand against you seemingly, is get out of this compulsory treatment field, or for that matter even the voluntary treatment field, and leave it to the feds, who have been exceedingly loath to help any government in British Columbia on this in the past 25 years. What do you say to that? Should you get out of the field altogether?
Well, Jack, I guess it's a fair question. We could get out of every field, you know, that was controversial or tough to handle, and certainly the matter of drugs and the control of drugs of all kinds, whether they're heroin or anything else, doesn't have an easy solution, and you could just throw up your hands and say, let's get out of it all.
Are you considering that, Lang?
No, I'm not considering that at this present time.
You were told by a very learned judge that you've no right to be in that field, that in effect he's saying your people in the Attorney General's office misguided you, it was clearly ultra vires, and the whole thing's been a waste of time.
Not quite, Jack, because what really happened is that, yes, you're right, that the judge has said, in my opinion, and in other legal, and in the legal people's opinion, that British Columbia has no jurisdiction in the treatment field or the control field in narcotics. But I think the problem is clouded by a change that happened effectively in the law earlier this summer, with another court case before the Supreme Court of Canada. When we went into this field, we were pretty sure we were okay, and certainly okay at the voluntary end. But the law changed by a Supreme Court ruling earlier this summer, and coupled with the ruling now by Chief Justice McEachern, there's no doubt that our programs are under certainly some cloud. And I've made that point very clearly to the federal government, and I've said that since the federal government hasn't acted in 50, 70 years in this matter, maybe now is the time to do it and to pick up their responsibility. But I don't consider our program to be either in collapse or in shambles, and I have no intention, certainly, of getting out of the business of heroin, narcotic treatment programs, at least until I'm advised to do so, because we're not going to let the 350 people who are in treatment now, nor the staff that we've hired, nor the commitment that we've given to the people of British Columbia go down the tube.
Well, you went to Ottawa and you came back empty-handed, did you not?
I don't think so, Jack.
Virtually empty-handed.
No, I think we, rather, I think we came back with almost everything we asked for, if we can believe the if we can believe the press reports that have come from
they're
Ottawa since.
They're sympathetic,
No,
of course.
They'll do more than that. We've had a promise now from them that they will put forward amendments to the criminal code that will allow for diversion into our program. We have a commitment from them that they will share in it, not in terms of how many dollars, but they will share in it. And incidentally, I've said this ever since we started talking about this, that I was sure the federal government would, and I'm assured now that they will. The problem we still have at the present time is to clear up this jurisdictional problem of who does what.
Presuming, and we must presume, and we can't influence an appeal court, that the McClelland judgment is upheld. All you have,
Thank you.
And you get your C-21 from federal government. You know perfectly well, Mr. McClelland, I suggest to you that your plan to use the police introduction through assessment boards is for the moment down the tube, and has been down the tube since you set up your expensive, and it is expensive, arrangements. Is that not correct? And therefore, what all you are really doing from now on is either voluntary continuation of methadone or some therapy, or some few people being directed by the courts into luxury empty Brannan Lake.
Well, you say few people, Jack. I'd say more and more people being directed by the courts, because now 20 judges in the province have decided that the heroin treatment program is a worthwhile one for the treatment of addicts, and have sent people to our program, some 26 people through those 20 judges so far. And that program is gaining more and more favor among, among the judges, among the prosecutorial people, among the probation people, among the corrections people. The program is gaining credibility. So, but you're right, Jack, we have now effectively only what we've had since we started the program, voluntary and court referral. But if Ottawa will pull those amendments to the criminal code out of the omnibus bill and pass them immediately, then we have much more than that. We have direct court and probation referrals to the plan, which should, if it works, fill up at least 85% of our program.
Well, let's look at it quite clinically. In Prince George, you've got a staff of 12 and you've no new addicts. You have a staff of 12 and all you're doing is a few old methadone holdovers.
Oh, but, well, that's possible, Jack, but as I've said, the program is gaining credibility. We need, and we know we need, a way in which to get people into the program. You know, that's been my contention from the beginning, and it's the reason we developed the compulsory aspects, because the federal government would not act. And Jack, the federal government does have a responsibility to act in this treatment end, and Chief Justice McClelland pointed that out very clearly, because the federal government has signed international conventions saying that they will provide treatment. They never have.
Let me take another tack.
Let me say, though, Jack, that that will happen, but we've got to have something else that will get addicts into the program, and it's either compulsory or it's some other way.
By the end of this year, you'll be $8 million into the compulsory treatment, right?
no.
$4 million by June.
No.
Well, you'll be $6 million by the end of this year.
No, we have spent about $4 million now, Jack.
That you spent it till the end of June.
No, we've spent about $4 million now.
And what have you got? You've got 200 holdover methadone cases and
150.
108, it was said the other day. You now say 150. At the press conference, it was 108, wasn't it?
Well, I don't know. It wasn't my press conference, but I'm telling you today that we have about 350 people in treatment now.
And you've got 300 staff.
Well, we have 300 staff altogether. That's we've got
treating 150 people.
Well, 350 people, Jack.
Well, the methadone ones are just on maintenance.
Well, no, they're not anymore, because the methadone people, although they're still getting methadone, are no longer, Jack, just coming in for their maintenance and going home. They've committed themselves to be part of our program, too, which is a lot more than just giving people maintenance of any kind, and so they are part of the program. You must consider that there are 350 people in the program and 300 staff. You know, that's not out of line in terms of any other treatment programs we've got.
I'm not joking when I tell you this, but your staff are so desperate looking for work that they're even taking people in for Sinotab and aspirin abuse.
Oh, well, Jack, that's a bit of an overstatement, and you know it. But sure, they want to work.
Not so sure it is. I mean, at Brannan Lake, you know perfectly well that there's more an atmosphere of a college research centre, and that they walk out and hold press conferences and walk back in again.
Sure.
Have the little pot parties or come in drunk. Because, yes, that's happened.
Sure, they're coming. Yeah, they're coming. They're doing that everywhere, you know. listen, look at the security you've got in your jails and federal prisons, and you still get alcohol in there, you still get drugs in there, you still get heroin in there, you still get women in there to visit with men. You can't stop it, Jack, and that will always happen. But what I'm saying to you is that, yes, we need more people in our program. There isn't any doubt about that, and we need a way to get them. The way that the British Columbia government proposed to get them was through our Heroin Treatment Act. That act is now set aside, at least until appeal procedures are heard. But there is another way to get them, and we have said that from the beginning as well, and that is if the federal government will get off their butts and take on the responsibility that they have for the treatment of heroin addicts, and they have promised us they will.
And if they don't do it, why not dump it in their laps?
Well, I have effectively, if you've read the proposal I made to them, Jack, I have said very clearly that right now British Columbia is effectively out of the heroin treatment business, and it's up to you to do it. But what I've also said is that we want to be partners in this, and that we will help them in any way we can, and that we will help them to make an orderly transfer.
Are you not terribly disappointed about the whole thing? You came into this bright and shiny-eyed with big budgets and big plans, and nothing but trouble.
I'd be.
And now the province advocates the legalization of heroin.
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, if I thought this one was going to be easy...
The province paper, that is.
Yeah, I know. If I thought it was going to be easy, I'd have had something wrong with me. Heroin, you've been involved with this business, Jack, a lot longer than I have. And you know that there's a hell of a lot of money involved in it. There's a lot of interest involved in it. And there's a lot of special interest that doesn't want to see our program succeed. True. And I knew that was there.
It's a $250 million tax-free business.
Of course. And nobody said this was going to be easy. And to say that I'm not disappointed would be a lie. I am disappointed.
Webster and Bob McClelland after this break. Well, when I begin to lose interest in a story like this, you can get a measure of my disappointment and the mess and the furor. But let me ask you one very simple question. Is it not a fact that since the McClelland judgment, you have no authority in British Columbia as the Minister of Health or as the Attorney General to deal with anyone in relation to drug rehabilitation?
Well, Jack, that's the reading that I get from Chief Justice McClelland's
You can't even
judgment.
treat them...
That's what a lot of other people, including the people in the Justice Department in Ottawa, get out of the judgment. But having said that, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning of this program. We are not going to see our treatment program go down the tube in that way that easily. We are going to do whatever it is that's necessary legally to carry on, and we'll carry on the program until we're advised that we must stop. And if we have to treat everybody for arthritis and treat them under the Ministry of Health, then we'll do that until we have the thing cleared up.
So you'll be giving them methadone for their arthritis?
Well, whatever it is that's necessary. And I'm not kidding. We're not going to see this program go down the tube, Jack, one way or the other, unless, unless we're told in very clear terms that we can't do it any longer. That, though, makes it all that more urgent that the federal government has got to make some response, and I believe that they will.
Let me get that clear. Okay, your Compulsory Treatment Act is down the tube. That means your Alcohol and Drug Commission Act is down the tube.
Well, no, only in terms of, in terms of of treating narcotics. See, the judgment is very clear on that, Jack, and let me just read you one sentence in the judgment, and it says, once it's established that a subject matter has attained certain dimensions, it becomes a matter of exclusive federal jurisdiction, and there is no room left for a province also to legislate with respect to that subject matter. And then it goes on to say, in my view, this is the Chief Justice's view, the larger field of narcotics is the total legislative enterprise, and a province cannot invade any part of that field by attempting to employ a different technique. So he's saying that we can't get in that field at all.
I've got it. BC Civil Liberties should now start an action to force you to close your illegally operating methadone your treatment centres.
Well, they might just do that, except that I think that they wouldn't get the cooperation then of the people who are depending on those treatment centres for some hope. And that's the tragedy of this whole thing. And I've said earlier, Jack, that the program is starting to gain some credibility. It's tough because there's a heck of a lot of people out there who don't want to see it gain that credibility. Well, but we're going to. All I can say, Jack, is that we're going to keep going, and I am disappointed, but I don't think we've lost anything. And particularly if we can get this entry into the program through the courts, we'll have gained back anything we've lost.
Which federal ministers did you see in Ottawa? Crombie?
Saw Crombie as Minister of Health, Justice Flynn, and Solicitor General Alan Lawrence.
Did they even know what you were talking about?
Well, no. I'll tell you, we went to the previous federal government with a blitz in the last 2 years to tell them what the problem was in British Columbia, and we did the same thing to the three ministers this time. I outlined the entire program for them, the problems we have in British Columbia, the history, the whole thing, and I must say, Jack, that I was encouraged because they did say, okay, we recognize you've got a problem, let's work on it, and since, and I haven't had correspondence with them since. The Attorney General will be meeting this week with them, or next week rather, but they've said that they're going to do what we asked them to do, so what more can we say at this time?
As far as Brandon Lake is concerned, you're going to continue to operate it?
Yes.
But only for voluntary and people ordered in by the odd sympathetic judge.
Well, it's the same as we've been doing since the
methadone
April
treatment
1st.
Centres you will keep operating, even though on the face of it they may well be illegal.
We're going to keep operating our program, Jack, until we're advised otherwise.
You're going to keep your 300 staff even if there's not enough work for them to do.
Well, yes, because, you see, the 300 staff is a bit of a red herring because you've got to have a certain number of staff to run a program. And there's an optimum number below which you can't go in order to keep a program going 24 hours a day. And the 300 staff that we have at this time is that optimum number. It isn't out of line, in my opinion, for the 350 people that we have in treatment. And I just think that, and the program does operate 3 shifts, 365 days a year. So that's not out of line.
I feel sorry for those people with the problem in their families. And I presume we still have, roughly speaking, 6,000 active heroin users in the province of British Columbia.
Yes, we have over 6,000, and those figures are no longer challenged by anyone because, including the federal government, who now accepts those figures as absolutely correct.
I'm going to take a break now. When I come back from that, I'm going to go to other topics and the telephones with Bob McClelland, Minister of Health. Mr. McClelland, as a senior cabinet minister in the Social Credit government, you must be tackled on the pathetic dirty tricks scandal. Are you ashamed of this performance?
Well, I don't know whether ashamed is the word, Jack.
Shamefaced, maybe the word.
Well, from time to time, I have a feeling that the sort of preoccupation with it in the press gives it more importance than it deserves in the annals of the history of British Columbia. But I don't like the allegations that were made, not the allegations, but the statements that were made. Well, the statements that were made. Sure, I don't like those, and no one in politics would like those. I think the point that a lot of people forget is that despite the fact that someone in our party made those suggestions to a group of party members, it was laughed off. It was never considered seriously. Nobody that I'm aware of in our party did those things, certainly not in my constituency, and if anybody in my constituency ever did it, then there would be, heads would roll in the constituency. The point is, it was not done.
I must point out to you that there are 2 police investigations underway at the moment.
Yeah.
One in Victoria, one in Vancouver.
Yeah, that really has nothing to do with
And the
same thing. That's another issue.
I'll agree,
frankly.
it's a pathetic, dirty trick, sorry mess, badly handled, which wasn't cleaned up as it should have been instantly. But,
Yeah.
I mean, the nasty thing about it, Bob McClelland, is that was a way back last September. These tapes kick around till just before the election, and even to an old hand like me, it looks like they were deliberately sent out as election material instructions.
Well, I guess
I mean, that's the timing of it.
Sure, I guess that's right. But I think you could look at it another way, Jack, and say that because they sort of hung around for so long, that's indication that no one paid much damned attention to them. And I think that, that it has been handled badly. I think the Premier pointed that out very clearly in his press conference when he came back from Japan. And I don't know what else the Premier could do except accept full responsibility as he did, and let those chips fall where they may.
Not enough people have committed, if I may pull a little joke in reference to Bennett Sands trip, not enough people have been made to commit Harry-Carry.
Well, even at that, you know. I don't know, Jack. People make mistakes. You make mistakes. I make mistakes.
Me?
We don't get fired over them just
I'm not
because we make
responsible for
mistakes,
public.
so.
I'm not responsible for public policy or public funds or even caucus funds used for a political party in the overlapping of.
Yeah, but surely no one expects that people, whether they're in politics or government or opposition or anywhere else, never make mistakes.
Mr.
All
McClelland,
I'm saying is that you don't conduct witch hunts over every issue.
You have been accused quite brutally by innuendo that you're in a conflict of interest in Gloucester properties. The 626 areas in Langley. 626 acres in Langley, BC Hydro, Gloucester properties. Do you accept that you were in a conflict of interest?
Oh, I don't even accept that anyone has accused me of being in a conflict
I've got
of
it in
interest.
print in front of me.
Where does it say that?
It says, McClelland just happened to sit in the Environment and Land Use Committee on Cabinet that drippy July 4th, 1979, when the deed was done.
Well, I'm a member of the Environment and Land Use Committee, Jack, and that's my responsibility to sit
And that
on
the
that
Gloucester
committee.
Properties Director, Ainsley Loretta, worked out of your campaign office during the last provincial election.
Yes, and probably 70% of the landowners in Langley also worked out of my campaign office. I have a fairly large membership in
Is she a
my
social
constituency.
creditor,
Yes,
Ainsley Loretta?
yes, she is.
And, of course, that whole 626 acres was plastered with re-elect McClelland signs.
Well, I don't know about that. It might have had a couple of re-elect McClelland signs, but I think anyone who was in Langley during the election campaign would have known that Langley was plastered with re-elect McClelland signs. And, you know, and I'm not trying to be funny here because it was. And I do have a very large membership. And as people who are in business and of various kinds are naturally probably more inclined to be a member of my party than another party. And that's the truth, and that's the case as it stands. I'm in no conflict of interest position in this, you know, and I don't think anyone has seriously suggested that I am.
Well, you know, it's the old social credit bit again. You're accused, you know, quite brutally of being used car dealers and land speculators. Now, this land was in the freeze.
Sure.
And Kinnear, the chairman of the BC Land Commission, Axel Kinnear, said, we look at things technically, and they kept it in, but they, that's you, look at things politically, and you let it out. The obvious implication from the most sane man on the street is, I wonder if it was a campaign promise.
Well,
Was it?
Maybe it was a campaign promise to look at the Land Commission in more sensible terms than it has been in the past in terms of what kind of land is held in the reserve and what kind isn't. You know, when you attack the opportunity for people to reach the cabinet with appeals from the bureaucracy, then you attack the very opportunity to have access to the people whom you've elected to look after your business. And there's nothing wrong, Jack, with a cabinet or an elected group of people having the chance to serve as an appeal body for bureaucratic decisions. Now, the Land Commission has one criteria only by which it can study the inclusion or exclusion of land. Is it agricultural land? And so far, they have used really only one criteria to achieve that, and that is the Canada Land Inventory. Even by the Canada Land Inventory standards, the land in question in Langley is not prime agricultural land.
Question. You said, yes, there may have been a campaign promise. Were you asked prior to the campaign to look sympathetic at the removal of the 626 acres of Gloucester property from the freeze?
We've been dealing with that for several years now, so I've been involved with it in a number of ways. But as a matter of fact, Jack, during the campaign and during an all-candidates meeting in Aldergrove, I was asked point blank whether I favored the exclusion of that land, and I said yes.
That's before you made the decision.
That's before I made the decision.
So your position has always been clear?
My position has always been clear, and as a matter of fact, everyone will know that during the appeal hearing, I made it very clear publicly at that time that I would not vote during that appeal hearing. And so I absented myself from that deliberation, and so there can be no conflict of interest of mine. I've been and as a matter of fact, before the election was called, I was asked the same question at a public meeting called in Aldergrove to discuss the Gloucester property, and I refused to answer it because I said at that time I was a cabinet minister plus a representative from Langley, and that I would not answer that question, and I didn't care whether they defeated me for it. But once the election was called and the situation changes and you no longer are technically an MLA at least, then I said yes, I favored, because you can't cop out to that degree.
Yes, you favored
at that
it,
time.
and yes, you absented yourself from the committee.
And yes, I absented myself from the committee, yes.
But yes, you will agree with me that when you tell me that Ainsley Loretto is a social creditor of Gloucester Properties, and you approved of, you obviously openly said, yeah, that should come out. That should be for industrial purposes.
Well, but Jack, if you want to take that a little further, what you should do as a good journalist is check back to those which I have been involved in, which we've turned down, and find out how many of those were social creditors, because I think you'll find that most of them were social creditors too, yet we turned them down.
Fair enough, but the point I'm making is that you adopted and accepted in the main, no doubt about it, the NDP agricultural land freeze, which is now widely regarded as basically a good piece of legislation.
Well, sure, and don't forget though the progression of this thing. When that piece of legislation first came in, it was far more than an Agricultural Land Commission Act. It was a zoning act for the province of British Columbia. It was changed and changed and changed. It's been changed since, and I have no doubt that modifications could be made in the future. But the point is that the credibility of the Land Commission cannot be held up if land which is not viable for commercial agriculture are kept in. Listen, Jack, we've got hundreds of thousands of acres of land in far northern BC which are being kept in the land reserve, and which everybody in far northern BC knows will never ever be used for agriculture. Now, we've got to have some credibility for the Land Commission if it's to do what it's supposed to do, and that is protect land for the future generations on which produce can be grown.
Twice the Land Commission itself refused the application of Gloucester Properties to have that out the freeze. They felt it was prime agricultural land. They are the scientific body. Along come the politicians. Now, even though you didn't vote, it worries me that a political decision can be made on what is obviously in the area of good agricultural land for the breadbasket of British
Jack,
Columbia.
It's of the land which is in reserve in Langley, only about 35% of it could be classed as prime agricultural land. Of the land that is in the reserve in Langley, the Gloucester properties, although 600 acres sounds like a lot, and it is, 600 acres in the agricultural land reserve in Langley is 0.009% of that reserve.
But 40%, there's been a vast amount of stuff coming out of the land freeze in the last few months.
Well,
since
in the
the
last
election.
No. There
What's the
hasn't,
exact figure,
Jack? I think if you looked, if you looked now at what was coming out to what was going in, you'd find that there were more refusals on appeal than there have been acceptances, and I think that you deliberately, and people deliberately, don't look at that because it's not news. But that's a fact, nevertheless.
Last Friday, Gary Runker, one-time chairman, announced he was resigning to protest these recent decisions, which represent 40% of all the land ever removed from the reserve by ELUC over commission objections.
You know, Gary
Good man, Runka.
Gary Runka, I'm sure, is a good man, but he had already announced long ago that he was leaving by the end of this, I think by the end of this year. That's why he was no longer chairman. He relinquished that position so he could make plans to go into private business for himself. And, you know, that's an easy position for someone to take when they've already said they're going to quit.
Questions to Bob McClelland, Social Credit, MLA, Cabinet Minister, Minister of Health, etc., 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 etc. Going to throw you to the wolves.
Okay.
Bob McClelland and you. Go ahead, please.
Well, Mr. McClelland, is it not true that before you dispense methadone to your methadone patients, you must get the authorization of Ottawa? Or is it a provincial authority that gives you that authorization?
No, we have a blanket authorization from Ottawa. Physicians who dispense methadone must have authorization from Ottawa.
Well, I'm a patient at one of your clinics, and I was told very clearly a few weeks ago that Ottawa sets down definite guidelines for dispensing of methadone.
That's correct.
And secondly, as a methadone patient, I signed a statement a year ago that I would be given what is known as special status.
Yes.
And that I would definitely not have to be involved with the new program. I
No.
could avail myself of their services if I desired to do so, but I was not compelled to do so.
Yes.
I also think that the Alcohol and Drug Commission is aware that if they did not dispense methadone, that very few of us would have anything to do with the new program. It's not that we're against voluntary treatment, but certain aspects of it, such as the present program at Brandon Lake, are nonsensical. They're
Well.
absurd. It almost cries out to be manipulated.
Well, anything that has to do with
The program at Brandon Lake?
Excuse me, anything that has to do with narcotic addiction, ma'am, cries to be manipulated because
He himself, a few
narcotic
weeks ago,
addicts.
I heard him talk about programs in prisons where people are put in positions where they must give the right answers.
Oh, that's true, but that's manipulation which goes on, especially in all fields of social work and counselling and rehabilitation in our magnificent institutions.
In fact, if I was a condemned murderer in the BC pen, I would automatically get meals. In Brandon Lake, I have to earn points to get those meals.
Oh, you do not, ma'am. You get 3 meals a day in Brandon Lake.
Check that out, sir.
Oh, that's not correct. And
oh,
well,
ma'am, you're free as a bird in Brandon Lake.
You're on a flight of fancy that really is beyond belief.
Would you check it out before you condemn?
Yes.
Hello. Your clients are on this program the moment you show your face.
That's right. Everybody is on the program.
Your
and,
clients, your friends.
That's
not my friends, your friends. Go ahead, please.
Hello, how are you today?
I don't know,
Get
Jack,
to the point,
I'd
please.
just like to point out that they're your friends because they don't phone me at my office. I only hear from them when I'm on this program. So.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I agree completely with this Brandon Lake program and any program they have to help any addicts.
You agree with it?
You bet your life, 100%.
Well, what do you think of Ottawa, the judgment that knocks it down?
Well, Ottawa, as far as I'm concerned, they're too busy with worrying about Quebec. They're not too busy worrying about us right here in BC.
Almost said Ontario.
It's about time we start taking our own initiative and then wait for their laws to get passed, which may take, 6 months to a year.
Are you an addict?
No, sir.
Good for you. Much obliged. Go
Thank
ahead,
you.
please.
Hello.
Yes.
I was wondering if you're aware of the number of alcoholics that there are in Skid Road.
Yes.
Do you have a compulsory treatment program for these people?
Well, sir, there is a provision under the Summary Convictions Act which allows for compulsory treatment of alcoholics as well. And yes, I'm aware of how many, well, not the certain numbers, but I know that there are a hardcore group of very addicted alcoholics on Skid Road, and anyone who's in British Columbia knows that.
Of course we know it. What's the point of your question?
Okay, the point is this, that every time that somebody gets involved in something like, for instance, we have more gambling going on today. Well, we have a gamblers treatment center.
Well, yes,
Millions and
sir.
millions and
In other
of dollars
words,
being
he
spent every
suggests that
day.
you're pampering too many people with too much public money.
Well, Jack, the point is that we pointed out earlier today that we have about 6,000 heroin addicts. Those 6,000 addicts are responsible for $250 million of public costs in BC today. I think that means that there's some action that should be taken.
And look at the potential for graft and corruption. You know, I'm beginning to change. I'm going to say to you one of these days, Mr. McClelland, you've got to legalize it. Take the profit out of it. Get rid of the graft and corruption. Get rid of the potential venality.
Listen, governments can do that.
Let the kids have it in the schools.
Sure, let anybody.
Give them needles with their
That's right.
lunch kits.
That's right. And that's, you know, if you listen to some people in the public, that's what you should do.
Right.
But I don't intend to have our government
Nor
take
do
that
I.
stand.
Go ahead, please.
Hi.
My government won't do it either.
I said ours.
Oh, no, I'm not. You're not my government. Go ahead, please.
You all there?
Yes.
No.
Okay, I'm a heroin addict, an ex-heroin addict. I used for over 7 years, and I've quit. And I think that any kind of program that the government comes up with is definitely not going to work. Because 90% of the heroin addicts that are on the street don't want to quit.
Well, we know that.
They want to be out there. They want to fool the cops. They want to beat the cops at their own game.
They want the excitement of the chase.
90% of the bank robbers don't want to quit either. You know, so government shouldn't be in that business.
Well, the thing
I
is
think-
you can't force somebody to quit what they want to do. It's just like trying to make somebody quit smoking cigarettes.
It's easy.
Possible.
That's easy. Dead easy. She's just going to go round in circles. I was hoping people would hammer you on land deals or dirty tricks. I'm getting sick and tired of this heroin bit. Go ahead, please. Where are you?
Hello?
Yes.
Good morning, Mr. McClelland, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, you say that there are 6,000 heroin addicts in British Columbia. Yet about 2 or 3 weeks ago on the NewsHour, I heard the RCMP say that the supply of heroin to Vancouver is practically non-existent at the moment. So what are these people doing? Are they switching to different drugs or what?
Yes, some of them are. They're breaking into drugstores all over the province in increasing numbers to get alternatives for heroin. But you see, the operative word there is that you said about the police say that the supply of heroin is at a standstill, and it may be for the moment. But because of the demands on our enforcement officers, that moment is very short. And all that happens, because again, we have 60% of the heroin addicts in this and the crime in this country. We only have 25% of the police from the federal government attached to it.
The fact that
so
there's a
they
shortage.
just reform, come up again, and it's all the ball game's all starting again. That's
A
all.
break and one more segment with the minister after this. Bob McClelland, what steps are the Cabinet planning to take on the decision of the ELUC to remove the 626 acres for Gloucester properties?
Oh, Jack, I'm not sure that the Cabinet's going to take any steps. The Cabinet's, I'm sure, will be discussing it, but the law...
Are you going to refer it to the Cabinet?
Am I going to refer it to the Cabinet?
Yeah, there's a report today suggesting that the Cabinet has already decided to overturn the decision to remove the 600 hot acres.
No, that's not true.
It's not true.
No?
You would know if the Cabinet had decided.
Yes?
You can tell me it's not true that they've decided.
Yes?
It may well be discussed at Cabinet.
Oh, I'm sure it will be discussed at Cabinet, as every other item is, especially one which has attached itself to some controversy.
Bellingham, Washington, go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, I'd like to tell Mr. McClelland that before he started that inane program up there, he was warned by several people that the thing would be declared illegal, and it was true folly for him to go on with it. In the guise of well-meaning efforts to do something about drug use, this society may inadvertently institutionalize it as a never-ending project.
Is that my friend from Normal?
That's your friend from Normal.
Thank you and goodbye.
I'd like to answer the question, though, Jack, about having been warned. Sure, people said that they were going to challenge it, and we expected that. And this won't be the last challenge, I'm sure. But we had exhaustive conversations with the Federal Justice Ministry, who told us that as far as they were concerned, what we were doing was constitutional.
Do you see what that normal caper did? Remember, he was in welfare, and he was taken off welfare. He won the appeal, and he was executive secretary of Normal on his welfare allowance.
Well, Normal has now a $450,000 a year operation, so they're getting some money from
Federal
somewhere.
government?
Well, no, they're getting it from somewhere, though.
And now he phones me from Bellingham, Washington, as if he could fool me. Sam and Arm.
Good morning.
Yeah.
As Mr. McClelland said, there's some 300 working on this business. What would be the average salary of these 300?
Oh, sir, I haven't any idea. But you know, it's they're employed through the civil service, and they're paid the normal BCGEU negotiated salaries.
Well, shall I have a guess?
I'd say $20,000.
Plus 20% fringe benefits.
And then, speaking on this land, there's
Yes,
a lot
sir.
of the land that has come out of the land freeze, and it's the best of the land, and there's a lot of the land left in the land freeze that is poor land. What do you remarks on that?
Well, I think that's probably absolutely correct. Over the years since the commission has been formed, that's probably true, and I think that's one of the reasons that in order to maintain the credibility of the commission, that you've got to get back to a position where the protection is put on prime farm land, and that you don't attempt to protect that land which will not be productive for farm use.
Go
in the
ahead,
future.
please.
Yes, Mr. McClelland, I'd like to correct you on a statement on your voluntary patients. You're
Yes.
saying there's 350 patients,
Yes, ma'am.
and you're classing 150 addicts that are on the methadone program.
No, 200.
200, ma'am.
Well, 200.
Yes.
I am on methadone, and we are not classed under your program. Last June,
Well-
we got a letter from your office saying that we would be called...
Well, ma'am,
No.
as far as we're concerned in British Columbia, we have a heroin treatment program. You happen to be part of it as a methadone patient. You've been put on special status because we promised that we would not take any of the methadone patients off of their methadone maintenance unless they went off it themselves. And you are part of our heroin treatment program. You simply have some special status in the program.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. McClelland.
Yes, sir.
Yes, are you still using methadone at Brandon Lake?
We don't use methadone as part of our treatment and for any new people except as a withdrawal tool at the beginning in the detoxification stage, sir.
How long would the withdrawal be?
Well, the detoxification may take different times for different patients.
You an addict?
I used to be, yeah. And I don't think that methadone is the answer.
Neither do
it's
we,
just
sir.
trading one addiction for the other.
I agree with you absolutely, sir, and that's the reason that the program is a drug-free program and that drugs are only used in that detox stage.
Best of luck anyway.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
He sounds a bit jumpy this morning, doesn't he? Go ahead, please. The caller. Go ahead,
I'd
please.
like to talk about the agricultural land freeze. Mr. McClelland made the statement that the agricultural land freeze had to maintain some sort of credibility, did he not?
That's correct, sir, yes.
And he said that in order for it to maintain its credibility, that it had to hold the...
I know what I said. What did you want to say, sir?
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm just recapping it.
Well done.
The best agricultural land held in the reserve and the least viable agricultural...
Yes. What's your point?
Okay, well, the point is that it seems that more land here in the Fraser Valley that is more agriculturally viable is being taken out than the stuff up in the north, which is less agriculturally viable.
Well, sir, that's not correct, and you just have to check the figures to find out that that's not true.
Okay,
There
which
is
figures
demand.
where can I get a hold of these
Well,
figures that would show me different?
The Agricultural Land Commission, sir.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Jack. Mr. McClelland, are you aware of the dangerous overcrowding of the veterans in wards B2, C2, and C3 at Shaughnessy Hospital? My second question is, you made a commitment at the turning of the sod for the Sick Children's Hospital that there would be a veterans wing. Have you abolished that completely? And third and finally, why do veterans be held in the emergency service for a period of 6 to 10 hours before getting a bed in Shaughnessy, whereas civilians are admitted straight to put on a ward?
Well, sir, I'll try and take your questions in order. Yes, I'm aware of the serious crowding conditions on the wards at Shaughnessy, and we must attack that problem very quickly. The commitment I made on the not on a wing, but rather on a new facility for veterans at Shaughnessy is very much alive. It's in the final planning stages. It should be under construction very quickly. It's a new 150-bed extended care facility for veterans on the Shaughnessy site. That program's well underway, sir, and you'll see it building very quickly. The third question, I can't, what was it, Jack, quickly?
The third question was why the veterans sick?
Oh, yeah, well, sir, I don't know whether that's true. I guess that all emergencies treat patients as they come in, and there has to be a system by which the people who are very under great pressure in the emergency wards decide who gets service when, and I don't think they decided on whether or not a person is a veteran or a civilian, as you put it, but rather on the needs that they have at the present time.
Well, as you leave the studio, Mr. McClelland, storm clouds are gathering over the head, said Webster with purple prose of social credit, and you're going to have a bad couple of years, and the way it's going now, if Barrett keeps his mouth shut, he can't lose.
Jack, nobody said it would be easy. I think our government's record will have to stand for itself, and I'm not afraid of standing up in front of that record and running for election. So,
Bob McClelland, Minister of Health. Webster. Next, Margaret Atwood. I sometimes am at a loss to decide which technique to use during an interview. I'm quite good with a hatchet, not bad with a hammer. Occasionally I can use a scalpel, but when I meet Canada's most famous novelist, I don't know which way to turn. So because you're laughing and smiling, I'm taking a quote out of that bald-headed old stinker, Peter C. Newman. Remember him? Runs a paper in the East. Becoming a metaphor is never easy. Look into that camera. And Margaret Atwood, with her wintry eyes and corrugated hair. You don't have wintry eyes, or do you?
Well, I suppose it depends on who I'm looking at.
Give me your wintry eyes look. No, that's soulful. That's not wintry. That's kind of...
We're in Vancouver. It's not snowing.
And your hair is not corrugated, is it?
I think of it as naturally curly myself. I used to try to straighten it, but you see, Peter's jealous.
He sure as heck is. He's a bald, funny little man with round shoulders. And,
but that's a nice piece now, you have to admit.
I suppose it's a nice piece. He says, Atwood is to Canadian literature, notes Roy McGregor, as Gordon Lightfoot is to Canadian music. More institution than individual. I don't like that. Do you?
You don't like meeting an institution?
No, I don't. I like meeting individuals. Do you regard yourself as an institution?
I don't, but I don't make that stuff up.
When was the first building block produced in the institution of Atwood in terms of novels?
Well, in terms of novels, I was living here in 1964-5, and not only did I write my first published novel here, but I also wrote my first published book of poetry here. So you can see Vancouver is very good for writers.
We've never met before.
No, I was very unknown then when I lived here.
No, but even since you have been known, you don't normally go on the book flogging circuit, do you?
I haven't done it since 1972, and the reason for that was, for my last two books with this publisher, 1976 and 77, I had just had a baby. And you don't take a young baby like that on tours like this.
You were very lucky last year, weren't you?
What happened? Oh, yes, I went to Scotland. Yes,
you picked
that was very nice.
What did you do in Scotland?
Well, it was an excellent place for writing. I finished this book. That took me till about January.
Weather was so bad you couldn't go out the house.
You're right. Not only that, every time it snowed, and it snowed about 8 times, everything shut down. And what they call the gritters all went on strike because they'd been waiting for years to do this. The gritters are the men who put grit on when it snows. And the airports all closed down, and a train tunnel collapsed, so you couldn't get to London by train. So we were just in Edinburgh for all that period.
And it's a very snooty, cold place, Edinburgh. I mean,
We
the
didn't
people are
find
chilly
it.
too, aren't they?
Well, we weren't moving in the chilly circles. We knew some writers and things like that, and of course we were guests, and
That's
we
right.
found that that myth of stingy Scotchmen just doesn't apply.
Doesn't apply in Glasgow.
No.
It doesn't apply in Edinburgh.
Well, no, they were very good. I mean, I think Graham was there for about a month before he ever bought a drink for himself. Everybody bought them
Well,
for
they're,
him.
they're certainly not slow in producing a drink in Scotland. It's one of their national characteristics. You know, it's quite incredible. Your first book was in '64.
I wrote it in '64.
Published in...
It wasn't published till '69 because Jack McClelland lost the manuscript for 2 years.
He would, wouldn't he? You mean he got it?
He hasn't done it since. He got it.
Approved it?
He approved it.
And lost it?
Well, and I was so young that I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to be hearing back right away. I thought it ordinarily took that long. And so I started finally writing them letters saying, where is it? And I didn't get any answers because they were too embarrassed. They were madly searching for it. And then I got an award for a book of poetry, and Jack McClelland read a piece on me that said I had an unpublished novel. And he wrote me a letter saying, let's see your unpublished novel. And he'd had it for 2 years.
You said you've got it. He
Yes.
found it, he published it. I tend to be kind of crass. I'm not going to ask you about money. You know, I'm not that crass, not with you, because I'm basically, you know, an elderly, somewhat sophisticated old gentleman who likes to be nice to ladies. I know that attitude will probably infuriate you.
I like people who are nice to me. Why not?
Well, I thought it was supposed to be sexist. If you're pleasant to women, you're supposed to be sexist and
No,
demeaning.
the thing is to be pleasant to everybody. If you're just pleasant to women and unpleasant to men, I suppose that would be sexist.
Or pleasant to some women and unpleasant to others.
Oh no, that's individualistic.
That's allowed.
Yes.
You're allowed to be nasty, aren't you?
Well, you are.
Oh, you too. You can be pretty sharp in your books, can't you?
In my books, yes.
Mm-hmm. You bad-tempered?
No, not bad-tempered. That is, it takes a long time to make
smolder.
me angry. Yeah, that's right.
You smoke
yeah.
and you sulk.
No, I sometimes become irritable towards the end of a day.
Well, I was going to ask you anyway. I hope you have outsold that other tall, balding Canadian institution, Burton. Have you outsold them in the numbers game?
I don't think so. No, he writes non-fiction and I write fiction. And
You've what? You're up to 600,000.
That's everything, though. That's paperbacks, poetry.
Let's
the
count
works.
everything. Can't you beat Burton?
How much has he sold?
I don't know, but the next time he comes, I'm going to tell him as a fact that Margaret Atwood told me that she had outsold
Don't
him.
you do that. My name will be Mud if you do that.
One's got to keep in with Pierre and McClelland and the Eastern Media Mafia, because if
They're
they
taller
snub
than
you,
I am.
yeah, you're dead if they snub you. Look, I think what I should do this morning is let people talk to Margaret Atwood, because we've already had people running up to me and saying, why didn't you tell me Margaret Atwood was on? My wife wanted the book autographed. You going to autograph books?
Sure.
Because it's you, I might even tell people where you're going to autograph.
I don't know. I know that I'm doing something at Woodward's.
That's
but
okay by me.
They're about to tell me when.
We'll get it
When,
during the
when.
break. Hang on. Your calls to the Margaret Atwood, who does not have wintry eyes and does not have corrugated hair and is, oh, my.
39.
Don't look at me. After the break. Margaret Atwood, household name? No, you're not an institution. Tell me, importantly, or tell me a serious question. How important would the likes of the Canada Council and grants in your early initial stages be to set you on your feet as an outstanding person in Canadian literature? How much of a help was it?
I didn't have it. I had an academic grant because I was a graduate student. So I had a grant to help me study Victorian literature. Before that, I had a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship. That's before the Canada Council. So I had those. And not until I was already established did I get my single and only, one and only Canada Council grant, which was not a junior grant, but a senior one. And I'm not eligible for those anymore because I make too much money. They deduct your income from the grant, and it would be zero in my case. So that's as it should be. There's no reason why they should give me money. I make enough of my own.
I'm a professional redneck on the subject, and there's one author from British Columbia who absolutely infuriates me. I'll do him the grace of not plugging his books, who got a grant, $5,000, and the book went whammo, you know. It's a formula book. It was a formula book. And I said to him on the air, this was on radio, "Oh, you got $5,000 from County Council. You're making so much money, I presume, dear friend, you're going to give it back." He said, "No." Who was right, he or me?
Well, I think when you start making money, you give it back in the form of taxes. That's how they get it out of you. But you have to pay. It used to be that when you got a grant, you didn't have to pay taxes on it, but now you do. So that any grant money that you get is counted as income. So automatically you can deduct whatever taxes the person is paying.
Well, that's a logical step. That's a step in the right direction. But you would approve of County Council grant to young, or grants anyway, from public funds to young, struggling literateurs. Otherwise, you'd have no such being. Is that right?
Well, I think once upon a time it was very necessary. Once upon a time they put money into writers, you know, just to establish writing as a serious thing to do. Because when I grew up, nobody even thought of writing as even an occupation or something that anybody should take seriously at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at least it gave it a kind of legitimacy. When I was growing up and I said I wanted to be a writer, people said, "What?"
Yeah.
I said, "What? What do you mean, a writer?" Because there weren't any visible ones.
And in medieval days, in olden days, I suppose you had to get a patron, didn't you? Is that what you called them?
Long ago, I think many hundreds of years ago, they had patrons for the arts, certainly, and there aren't too many of those around today.
No, and the public temper.
So I think at one time it was useful, but now if I were the government, I would be putting it into studies of book selling. I would be putting it into the selling end, because if the selling end is taking care of itself, then the writing end, you'll be able to get those writers published.
Mind you, there has been a great increase in activity in Canadian publishing and Canadian buying of Canadian books by Canadians.
Well over 1,000%.
It's amazing.
Huge.
Go ahead to Margaret Atwood.
Morning, Miss Atwood.
Good morning.
This camera here, Margaret.
That one.
That one.
I'd like to know if you see Canada as finally achieving a separate Canadian literary identity, as opposed to the States, which for so many years we have been the same thing.
I think it's actually had a separate literary identity for a long time, but for a long time it wasn't recognized because people thought the adjective Canadian meant second rate, and they just weren't reading Canadian books. And I think that those days have long gone, but I think that identity has been there anyway since the 20s and 30s. In fact, I did write a book on the subject. It's called Survival.
Maybe, but what about the rest of the world? Like, do they see Canada as having a separate identity?
Very much so. In fact, I was in Germany this past year. I had a book coming out there in translation, and I was talking about, you know, the colonial mentality and all that stuff, and they said, "We don't know what you're talking about. We've always seen Canada as a separate country."
Well, that's very
partly because of the war too, I suppose, where the Canadians were so clearly identified as a separate force.
Yes, they were wild men. They were known quite distinctly.
As you can see in bookstores now, there are separate Canadian sections.
There have always been those Canadiana sections.
2 or 3 books usually that no one ever really bothered buying because
On
it
the
was
other
Canadian.
hand, once upon a time they would put everything Canadian in the Canadiana section along with the cookbooks and the books on maple leaves. And now, if you write a novel, they put you in with the real novels, which is a step ahead.
Thank you very much, old chap.
Thank you.
Are you a writer?
Practice.
Practice. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Margaret, and welcome to Vancouver. I wish the weather was better. I saw you about 7 years or 8 years ago at UBC, and ever since then you've been my ideal, and I enjoy all your books, and I hope you have more every year.
Thank you very much.
Why is she your ideal?
Because I'm a Canadian woman, a young woman, and her books, The Edible Woman, and all the rest of them, they just speak so much to me, much more than so many other books I've read. I'm quite a reader. I really enjoy her. And she just seemed to me, when I was going through university, she was just my ideal, just sort of she spoke to me, I guess.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Where from? Kelowna. Kelowna.
Hello.
Reading Kelowna?
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes. This is Betty Burton from Kelowna calling. Hello, this is Betty Burton from Kelowna calling.
Yeah, I can hear you, Ma.
Miss Atwood, I see a great resemblance in the Webster end of the family that we are connected with.
That's right.
Webster was my husband's grandfather, and I...
What did she say?
My grandmother's maiden name was Webster.
A fine woman.
belonged to the Webster Dictionary.
That's right, Noah Webster. Webster
Yes.
Dictionary.
Wealthy, too.
No, that was a long time ago. I don't think he made that much money out of
Your
it.
grandmother's maiden name was, what was her first name?
Webster. Her first name was Ora.
Ora.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, funny
But these
name.
were Websters that went to New England a
Yeah.
long time ago.
No relation to that. Ours are, we're peasants. You're intellectuals. That's a different, that's a fact.
I've got
Peasant.
some peasants too.
No, you're an intellectual. And what are you, Burton from Kelowna?
My husband's mother was Eugenie Webster.
Big Jeannie.
Eugenie.
Yes.
Eugenia.
Contact with Joy.
And anyhow, we're very happy you've made your familial acquaintance, and you say she looks like one of your Websters.
Oh, she looks like all of the girls.
Does she? Do you know this woman, Burton?
Sure, I know who she is, and I'll tell my mother when I go back.
Oh,
that I
well,
was
thank
talking
you
to
so
her.
much, Margaret.
Thank
And
you.
tell your mother, too, you were also talking to a real Webster. Thanks, love. Hope, BC.
Hello.
Hello.
Margaret Atwood. I would like to say first that I feel very honored to be speaking to you almost personally. And I have a rather weird problem. Maybe you can help me with it. I've been writing on and off for years. And in 1961, I had a story published in Prism International. And it was, I have to say, a good story. It was, you know, the best I've ever written. But ever since then, I've never been able to capture the same kind of writing. I do get rejection slips, and the usual comment is, your story is good, but not inspired, which I know. That certain flow of language that I was able to produce in this one story, I've never been able to produce this flow.
You want the secret of producing inspiration, is that right?
Something like that. I am now...
Otherwise, you're going to go on forever.
No, I'll finish. I'm writing quite a lot now, and in case you should say, well, are you writing enough? I'm writing a lot. My family has grown up. Do you have any kind of mental block like this, and if so, what do you do about it?
I never have, but a lot of other people have had, and I could see the possibility of doing it. But what I would recommend is try to remember how you wrote the first one, what the conditions were that you did it under.
Yes, I have tried that,
And you can't remember.
You see, big difference between you and a formula writer like Pierre, with these researchers who bring in huge stacks of typed stuff, and he says, yes, is that he gets up in the morning, you know, and goes for his jog, swims in the pool, and then sits down and writes exactly 896 words for the day, then leaves it till tomorrow morning. Is that what you do?
I don't get up in the morning, go for a swim, and go for a jog, that's for sure.
And you write full out for a long period? Or?
No, I can't anymore. I have a child, and that, of course, cuts down the amount of time per day you can spend writing. But I set aside 1 o'clock to maybe 5 or 6, and that's what I have to do the writing in. I have to condense what used to be 10 hours down into 5 hours. And for poetry, I don't have any schedule at all. It doesn't work. For prose, you have to have that time, but there's no telling whether you're ever going to write anything in those hours.
Yeah.
But usually I'm so desperate that I do.
You finally say, I've got to get started.
I've got to get started.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, hello?
Hello.
Jack?
Yes.
I wanted to tell you, I think your attitude toward women is very charming.
Thank you.
I want to ask...
She's never heard that before.
Yeah. I wanted to ask Margaret where she was born.
I was actually born in Ottawa, but I left it 6 months later in a pack sack, as a matter of fact. I was taken up to the Northwoods of Quebec. But my parents are from the Maritimes, and both of those names, my father's name is Atwood, of course. My mother's name was Killam. They're both Maritimes names, and that's where most of my relatives live. So the fact that I was born in Ottawa, don't hold it against me.
Killam.
And you were raised there?
Do I what, sorry?
You're
No, I
raised-
wasn't raised in Ottawa. I was raised in about 80 miles north of Temiskaming. No, sorry, 80 miles north of North Bay, near Temiskaming.
Okie dokie, thank you very much. Let's have some more calls from Atwood fans, please. Don't let me down, you stinkers.
They're not all fans.
Not one. You wouldn't get a nasty call if you stayed here 100 years.
Oh, I don't know.
Unless we
I
get
get
on to
some
something
nasty
horrible. You're not a great one. Yes, I suppose you're a great advocate for... Is there still women's lib, or is it it's everything
There's
okay
still
now?
women's
Is
lib.
it? You don't hear much about it, do you?
I was at a dinner last night honoring the Persons case, which was the case that established women as persons, according to law, in Calgary, and there were 900 women at it. Not only that, there was a waiting list of about 300. Really astonishing.
You're going to have to fill me in. I've never heard of the Persons case.
Well, once upon a time, women were not legally persons. That means they could not vote, they could not be judges, for instance, they could not be appointed to the Senate, any of those things. And what the law said was that women were persons from the point of view of pains and penalties. That is, they could be arrested and put in jail and all that. But they were not persons from the point of view of rights and privileges. In other words, they only got the bad part of being a person. And 5 Alberta women, among them Nellie McClelland, who's been on a stamp,
That's right.
took it to the Supreme Court, the Canadian Supreme Court, which said that women were not persons. Then they took it to the English Privy Council, which said that women were persons. And yesterday was the 50th anniversary of that event.
1929.
Yes.
As recently as 1929.
As recently as that. We've been persons for 50 years.
And only due to the courtesy of the Privy Council.
Yes, yes.
The Englishman, not the Canadian Supreme Court.
No, they said no.
How many Supreme Court judges are there women right now in the Supreme Court of Canada? Nil.
None, yes. There are some senators, though. I think
But that's
maybe
a political hack job. Anybody can get that job, but that's of no consequence in
once
this
upon
country.
a time, not anybody could get that job.
I mean, the right shade of political hack gets the job. So that's not something surely women of intellect, maturity, and decency will strive for.
Women are not angels. They're not above political hackdom, as I'm sure we all know.
In other words, the women have got to get their fair share of political payola and hackery as well as the men.
Well, if you're going to be a person, that's what you let yourself in for.
Yeah, but you get treated a lot lighter in the criminal justice system, I'll tell you. Don't you?
You get treated better?
Yeah, if you're a woman.
Yeah. Well, of course, there aren't as many women criminals.
You mean there aren't as many caught?
Well, I also think there aren't as many. They don't turn to sort of violence with guns and sort of beating people up and stuff like that. I think they take to drinking in private.
Yeah,
and
a lot of drugs.
And
I want to
mental
ask you.
institutions.
I want to ask you a serious question too about something else after the break. Take it away, Freddie. Pornography and prostitution. Deadly serious, Margaret, as you as an observer of the Canadian woman. We have the most sickening attitudes in this country where people think prostitution is perfectly all right, even for judges. But forget the judges. Think about the women. How would you tackle? What do you think of this? Should we accept it as normal and necessary? And I see somebody just the other day was talking about legalizing it in Canada.
Well, of course, I don't approve of prostitution. I don't like pornography any more than anybody else does. The way the prostitution laws are set up now, it seems to me that it's the women, it's the sellers, if you like, who get hit, and the buyers are pretty much scot-free.
True.
So you've got to equalize it one way or another. You've either got to say, okay, neither party, right? Or else you've got to say both parties.
Maybe it shouldn't be an offense at all, but then, you know, you get the people who have a fairly rigid standard of morals saying, I don't want my daughter growing up to be a hooker on the streets of Vancouver.
Well, I wouldn't want anybody growing up to be a hooker on the streets of Vancouver. I think that if you change the total attitude towards women, that women would not be seen as Kleenex, that is, disposable commodities, and then there wouldn't be any buyers, and then there wouldn't be any sellers. But you know that selling situation is created by buyers. In other words, if there are buyers who want something, there's always going to be somebody who's going to supply it, no matter what it is, if it's bubble gum or gold or whatever it is. There's always going to be a supplier. So I would say work on the buyers and not on the sellers. If you can turn around the heads of the buyers, then you won't have any prostitution.
Same goes with the pornography in a way, I suppose, but I think pornography and the magazines sold openly on the stands today, while we must have freedom and all the rest of that stuff, they do more to demean women.
Women and children.
Oh, the children one. I'd hang the people who use the children in these books.
Well, Civil Liberties, to which I belong, has fairly has thought about this, and as far as the child ones say, they say that photographs of children used for pornography should be illegal, because merely the taking of those photographs is exploitation of children. If they want to do drawings, help yourself, but not photos. And also the way in which it is sold ought to be controlled. That is, young children on the streets and innocent bystanders, if you like, should not be exposed to this stuff. If people are that desperate for it, they can go into a store. It doesn't have to be out on the street where other people have to see it.
I agree with that much. Go ahead, please.
Hello, good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
I'd just like to ask Mrs. Atwood if she is ever considered doing any work in the academic field as lecturing on her materials. I'm a UBC student, and I'm a little bit tired of listening to UBC professors discuss her work when I'd much rather hear it from her.
Well, I used to be a university professor. In fact, my first academic job was at UBC. But I was so young and low on the totem pole that what I taught was grammar at 8 in the morning, I might add.
Well, we hate taking it just as much as you hate teaching it.
Well, everybody was asleep, so it didn't really matter. But I would prefer not to lecture on my own work. I think that's the job of critics. I'm a trained Victorianist, and I'm quite happy to lecture on Charles Dickens and George Eliot. That's what I know something about. I would rather not examine my own work in detail because I'm still writing. Maybe when I stop, I will then turn my mind to what I have written, but right now I don't want to stop the process.
Has other university ever approached you for any type of guest lecturing?
Yeah, I get offers all the time, but I'm a writer, and right now I'm supporting myself with my writing, and since I'm a writer, that's what I really prefer to do.
Thank you. Good call, that one. Go ahead, please.
Margaret, I've just finished reading your book, Surfacing, and what part of Canada were you writing about in the book?
I was writing about a very specific part of Canada, namely the area where I grew up, about 80 miles north of North Bay on the Quebec side of the border.
And you often mention during the book about your dislike for Americans. Is this...
Well, that's social commentary. I don't put conversations in my books that I haven't heard in real life. Don't confuse the author with the characters, and take a good hard look at that scene in which she thinks they're Americans and they turn out to be Canadians. I think you can dislike a country's foreign policy without pinning it on every single individual in that country. You know, you have to take these things in the context of the book.
I was a little confused with the ending. Find her father?
Oh, yeah, sure. They dug him out. They dredged him up. He was the corpse.
Go ahead, please.
I was just wondering if you had any movie plans for Lady Oracle.
As a matter of fact, Margot Kidder, who plays Lois Lane in Superman, has an option on that book, and she wishes to develop it as a vehicle for herself. That is, she wants to play the central role. And she's now at the first draft screenplay stage, and she has a writer who works for Lily Tomlin, so I think she's going in the right direction.
Thank you. Good stuff. Oh, tonight, 7 to half past, Maggie Atwood will be in Port Royal Woodwards. Tomorrow, Saturday, 11 to half past, Woodwards Oak Ridge. And Victoria, Saturday afternoon in Woodwards. And
Really?
tomorrow night, reading in a literary storefront in Gastown at 8 o'clock. And in Victoria on Sunday at 8 o'clock, the Open Space Gallery. Well, reading and autographing. I should have got you to read some poetry, but I forgot. How are we doing for time, Freddie? My thanks to Margaret Atwood, a gracious, pleasant, evocative, literate intellectual, such as seldom seen on this rather low-brow program. Thank you, Margaret Atwood. I'll be back after these messages.